Good morning. Thank you for coming to this presentation on Amazing Ontario. And our speaker is Earl Provost. Now it's spelled Provost, but he tells me that the French-Canadian pronunciation is Provo. And we do have our provost here, Dr. Lisa Toms. And so I was asking Earl, what if he ever became a provost? They would call him Provost Proho. So very, very confusing. So he has been here since Tuesday, along with his assistant Carson Markley. And I hope you have the opportunity afterwards to visit with Earl. Unique personality is all I can say. Very interesting gentleman. He was appointed as Ontario's first agent general in Chicago in 2019. He serves as Ontario's representative in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. But Missouri is his favorite state of all of those. Yeah. In November of 2022, the government of Canada appointed Mr. Provost to serve as a commissioner on the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, a Canadian-U.S. binational treaty-based organization created to improve and perpetuate the $7 billion Great Lakes fishery. So he's been very active in politics and government for many years. He's from Toronto, so it's only natural that he would be here advocating about Ontario. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from Glendon College, York University in Toronto, and a master's in political management from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. So please join me in welcoming Earl Provost.
Thank you for that warm introduction. You know, some of the words he used could be taken two ways, though, I must confess. So my name is Earl Provost, and I'm Ontario's political and economic representative in the Midwest. And, you know, Missouri is one of our priorities in terms of building up that relationship. So before I get into the PowerPoint on what I do, I just want to give you some facts on Ontario. So currently Ontario's premier is Doug Ford, one of the finest people to ever walk the planet. And I want him to hear me say that because it's always good to suck up to your boss. And Ontario is part of Canada. So Canada, you know, it's a British parliamentary system. So we have a governor general in Ottawa, and each province has a lieutenant governor. And currently the lieutenant governor for Ontario is Edith Dumont, who's a Franco-Ontarian. In the Ontario legislature at Queen's Park, thank you. We have, there are 121 seats that are in the Canadian Parliament and 24 Senate seats, Ontario seats in Ottawa. And the population right now is over 14 million people. The official language is English, but Ontario is very multicultural. It's not just the Greater Toronto area. It's throughout the province, even smaller cities. It's a very multicultural, very frankly welcoming province. So so now I'm going to get into my actual presentation. Ontario has a network of offices in the United States and around the world, but in the United States, it's San Francisco, Washington, Dallas, New York, and Chicago, which is by far the most important Ontario office that we have in the United States. Yeah. So what we do. So the government of Canada, Ontario, like I said, operates a network of 15 international trade and investment offices and Canadian diplomatic missions around the world. They're all co-located in Canadian consulates, except for Washington, where it's Ontario has an office in the Canadian Embassy there. So my office was open in 2020, just as COVID was coming along. So that made things interesting. And as I said, I am Ontario's political and economic representative in the Midwest and Great Lakes region. And we have a broad mandate. So my job is to be helpful. So, you're going to get a lot of opportunities to see how you can contact me. And so please do so. My job is to be helpful. So contact me anytime for anything. And so working closely with the Canadian government and provincial municipal partners, we raise Ontario's profile and build commercial relations in key global markets in the Great Lakes and Midwest regions. But again, I have a political mandate too. So my job is to be helpful. Next slide, please. Can I do it or? I can, yeah. So the light blue is my territory. So people ask me, hey, how do you like Chicago? And I say, well, when I'm there, it's fine, but I'm hardly ever there. And within that light blue territory is obviously the most important state within the United States, which is Missouri. But I have 3 Canadian consulates, and in Detroit, Chicago, and Minneapolis. And I work very closely with those consulates. And the last few days, you've heard of what the Canadian consulate in Chicago does. So there's a full trade section, and with trade commissioners that are sector specific, working on how to boost Canadian engagement in the U.S. and Canadian trade with Canada and the U.S. And a lot of those companies, frankly, are in Ontario. When you think of Canada, Ontario is the best province, and a lot of what Missouri does with Canada is really Ontario focused. And then there's a political section, and they deal with the political and cultural engagement they have 3 states. They have Wisconsin, Illinois, and Missouri. So I've got a bigger territory, but the only reason I've had any kind of success is because I've been able to partner with the Canadian consulates in my territory, and we joined state chambers of commerce. So the Missouri Chamber of Commerce has been a great partner for us and has helped us build those relationships that we need to start doing in Missouri. Canada also has an honorary consul general in St. Louis, Sonette Magnus. And she's from Toronto, but she went to law school in the United States and then settled in St. Louis. So she's a dual citizen, but she certainly knows how to navigate the Canada, Missouri, Ontario, Missouri relationship. So the next. Great. So in my territory, the dark blue states, we are the #1 trading partner for those states. The light blue is we're #2. So you see with Missouri, we are Missouri's #1 trading partner, period. Ontario is the #1 trading partner. And you see that those numbers, so that's $6.2 billion total. That's in US dollars. So that's like 4 trillion Canadian dollars. 2/3 of that amount is Missouri exporting to Ontario. And the truth is, though, that I did this about a year ago. Those numbers have gone up a lot since then. In a post-pandemic world where you have choppy and unreliable supply chains with other parts of the world, we've got to enhance that north-south trade relationship, those trade corridors, the supply chains. And, I mean, I personally helped in 2023, I personally helped 6 Ontario companies reshore to Ontario. Then they established distribution operations or actual manufacturing operations in the United States. And that's just me. So there are other people who've done more than I have. So we're going to see, I think, in a post-pandemic world, that these north-south relationships grow and existing ones be enhanced. And, there's a lot of talk about, get the transportation routes. The big issue that will benefit Missouri when it's complete is the Gordie Howe Bridge. So, in the Windsor-Detroit corridor, 25% of all Canada-US trade goes through that corridor. The Gordie Howe Bridge, which is just a little east of the Ambassador Bridge, when it's complete, is a game changer. And it'll allow Missouri and Missouri manufacturers to get more product into Ontario and into Canada. It's a game changer, and it's hugely beneficial. But whether these states are number one or number two trading partners, those are still big numbers. And we have a lot of confidence that the Missouri-Ontario relationship will be further enhanced, further juiced up in the next few years as you get through the presidential elections and you have a new governor and there's a new strategy on Missouri's part to engage with Ontario. So this map is about the U.S. consulates in the Canadian consulates in the U.S. So again, I work closely with Detroit, Chicago, Minneapolis. So their territories are pretty, you can see what Detroit is, what Chicago has, and Missouri is part of the Canadian consulate in Chicago's territory and Minneapolis. But it doesn't matter if you have a question on anything. My job is to be helpful. So please contact me anytime for anything. So that map is more about just being informational and how we can help. So my job is to promote Ontario, period. So I help Ontario companies navigate south of the border, working with the Canadian consulates, working with Export Development Canada, and depending on the state, the Chamber of Commerce. So the Missouri Chamber has been great. Missouri is great, actually. And although I'm in Michigan next week, so I'm going to tell them they're great too. So, but we work with stakeholders, and you know, that is so that's primarily what I do in terms of exports from Ontario, but I help a lot of American companies navigate Ontario as well. And so far, we've had a lot of success on that. So it's not just all about economic activity, though. You know, I've got a political mandate as well. And finally, the next page. So that's me, and that's Carson Markley, commercial officer, who's also here. So that's how you can email me anytime for anything. I mean, I can't help you with an essay or a math exam or anything, but I think I can help with other stuff. And in terms of the Missouri-Ontario relationship, I've told you about the $6 billion in two-way trade, and that's US dollars again. And Missouri sells $4.5 billion worth of products to Ontario. So in terms of Missouri, aerospace, the heavily integrated industries we have are aerospace, chemical production, food processing, med tech, and transportation. Missouri does a lot of things very well. And you know, great partners for Ontario. Now, the key Missouri companies operating in Ontario, Anheuser-Busch, they bought Labatt Breweries about 20 years ago. So, you know, I have friends who actually worked for Anheuser-Busch in St. Louis for a long time, Canadians who, you know, their kids stayed here for university. And they loved it here. So, and what key Ontario companies that operate in Missouri are Magna International, Reuters America, Waste Connections, Woodbridge Corporation, and Martin Ray International. But the real point of all this is the potential. There's huge potential with respect to the Ontario-Missouri relationship. And my job is to build on that potential, you know, access it and figure out how to move forward with it. And being here at MSSU is a big part of that. And I have to tell you, I love the school. I like everything about it. I mean, it's too late for me to enroll, of course, but it's been a wonderful experience for me to be here. And I see huge potential in terms of the MSSU relationship with Ontario. And I see the great potential for the Ontario-Missouri relationship. And that is my mandate. And the Premier of Ontario is very happy I'm here because he knows of the potential of what we can do. So I think in 2025, it's going to be a big year for the Ontario Missouri relationship, and certainly on building the relationship between MSSU and Ontario schools. So that is the formal part of what I want to talk about, but I'm certainly open for questions if there are any. I mean, don't all rush to the microphone at once, though.
And we do have a microphone for you to ask your questions because this is being recorded and it's also live on Zoom.
So although it's not your district, is Montreal or Canada just in general doing anything to help with the disaster relief from the hurricane?
Well, Hydro One sent 150 personnel yesterday down to North Carolina and Georgia to help with that. So in 2013, the ice storms created big problems for Ontario. People were without power for a long time and for days and weeks, actually. And Americans came up, from the public utilities from the various states in the US came up to help Ontario. So, there's, I can only talk to Ontario, and Ontario is sending people. They just sent 150 yesterday. More is coming and more help is coming. It's what neighbors do. And 2013, a lot of Americans came to Ontario to help restore power and fix power lines and stuff like that. And we're going to do the same now. And that's just one component of it. I mean, their drinking water is scarce. I mean, I get to watch news too, and it's heartbreaking to see what's going on down there. So I know the Premier well enough to know that he's not going to just sit by and and not do anything. So Hydro One, which is Ontario's power provider, along with Ontario Power Generation, they're sending people, they're sending resources, and that's just the beginning of what Ontario is going to do.
Thank you.
So, Montreal is in Quebec, and I listened to some of the Quebec presentation this morning, and there's some questions about culture and baseball teams and hockey teams. So I can answer that stuff on Ontario. And also I think Montreal will get another baseball team, and I think Quebec City will get a new hockey team. Those teams just left at the wrong time. It was bad timing for Quebec. So
the Montreal Expos moved to Washington and became the Nationals.
yeah.
And the Quebec City team moved to Denver.
Yeah, they're the Colorado Avalanche. And they won the Stanley Cup their first year in Denver. That's a great team. So it's a business, and you got to have a venue where they can make money. So I think in the fullness of time, both those cities will get a baseball and hockey team again.
I recall reading that American baseball players are sometimes reluctant to come to Toronto to play for the Blue Jays as free agents because of the visa issues and passports and bringing family. And you think that's accurate?
Well, it's also taxes. But I mean, my job is to promote Ontario, and Quebec has a more difficult challenge because it's a different language. But Ontario, you can definitely operate in English in Ontario, and frankly, you can live in English in Quebec too. But my job is to promote Ontario, and it's always. I made a joke a few years ago with an elected official. I was at an event and it was July, and I made the joke that, well, it's July, it's our coldest month. And she believed me. So I can't make those jokes anymore. And another time, another elected official, I gave him my card, and He said, Ontario, good fishing in Ontario. I go to Sioux Lookout for good fishing, which is northwestern Ontario. And he asked me where I was from, and I said Toronto, which is a big, beautiful city. And he asked me, good fishing there? And I said, great fishing in Toronto, great fishing. So it's an ongoing challenge just to promote Ontario, promote Toronto, and remind people that they can do stuff. But, you know, me being here is also about getting MSSU to build relationships in Ontario. And you know, the great international studies program here. I think there's huge potential. Fact that you did a Canada semester, I mean, that's a big deal
And
too.
we've done a Canada semester twice.
I know.
You didn't
and
come the last time.
It was 15 years ago. You don't want to know where I was 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But so once people understand that Canada is very much like the United States, and Toronto is a big city like most American cities, only, you know, it's Canadian money. And by the way, the American dollar, it costs $1.40 Canadian to buy a US dollar. I get paid in Canadian dollars and live in US dollars. So I think you know how much I like that. You know, so American dollars go a lot further in Canada, and tuition is even for international students is a lot cheaper in Canada and certainly in Ontario. So I think to answer your question, once they, you know, the Toronto Blue Jays in particular, once they make the pitch and the dollars are competitive and people can see the city, see the new Rogers Center, you know, they're not too averse to coming. And you know, the Blue Jays were able to sign some of their biggest talent to long-term deals. You know, because they like the city. It's a very walkable city. It's I mean, I'm here to talk about Ontario too, but I'm from Toronto. So very walkable city, very friendly city. Lots going on.
Well, it's wonderful to have you here, so thanks for joining us at Missouri Southern. This may be a little bit out of the mainstream for you, but if you have some information on public education, including higher education in Ontario, maybe some similarities and differences to the United States, I'd be interested in hearing about that.
Well, you know, Ontario has 22 public universities, 24 community colleges, and about 500 private education institutions. So there's a lot of similarities between this school and any Ontario school, like post-secondary school in Ontario. And they are all anxious to build relationships with the United States. And you know, my region is the Great Lakes region. And what's particularly important about that is that it's very drivable. It's easy to get to Ontario from here, a little more complicated from other parts of the United States. So I see similarities here as I do in any Ontario University or community college. It's just so it's just about starting to build the relationships, right? I mean, tuition is a lot cheaper in Canada, in Ontario. And with the American dollar, it's that much easier for Americans to go. Even international tuition is cheaper than most in-state tuition in the US, which is why, you know, for a long time, McGill University in Montreal has done a great job marketing. University of Toronto, same thing, but now, you know, all of the Ontario universities are marketing into the US. So
You've mentioned how similar the two countries are, but one difference that struck me was with the response to COVID. Canada was much more restrictive than the United States was. And again, the Toronto Blue Jays would be a good example. They had to move to Buffalo, New York for part of the 2021 season because they wouldn't allow the international players into Toronto. And there was a huge trucker strike in Ontario. Maybe you could just speak to why Canada maybe had a better response than US, but certainly a more restrictive response.
So I was moved to Chicago officially as Agent General in January 2020. I was there for about 6 weeks and then I was ordered back to Canada, but I worked for Ontario. So the Canadian government couldn't make me leave. They called Ontario's Minister of Economic Development and said, tell him to get back to Canada. So I was ordered to get back to Canada and I couldn't come back here for 6 months. And after that, every time I traveled here, I had to get a COVID test to fly here, a COVID test to get back into Canada. I had more COVID tests than hot meals. So the Canadian government, the Ontario government, took the advice of the public health professionals. And that is what nobody really knew what they were dealing with at the time. So it was better to be safe than sorry. I mean, I know what the premier was being told and being briefed on and what the potential catastrophe that looms. So they were going to do whatever they needed to do, keep Canadians and Ontarians safe. It was probably a little too extreme at certain points and a little too overprotective, but I think in retrospect, given the information that the government had, Canadian and the Ontario governments had, they made the right calls. So it was a pandemic that hadn't been seen in some circumstances ever. We'd never seen anything like that. So, but yeah, the Blue Jays had to play in Buffalo. A lot of Americans didn't want to come across the border too. That was another issue. So, I think there are teachable moments from that whole experience that won't be repeated.
Other questions from the audience?
Good afternoon. The question that I have is as far as for the international business arena, in that field, for students that are studying international studies, are there internship programs for international corporations or companies in Ontario that would promote education training for those that are trying to specialize in business, economics, or any field within business?
Are you talking about doing an internship in a Canadian company or an international company based in Ontario?
Correct.
Yes, but with the private sector, it would depend on the company. But like Anheuser-Busch, yes, that they would have opportunities. And in terms of internships with the Ontario government, we could we're developing that kind of thing right now. There's a lot of potential on this. My being here is an acknowledgement of the huge potential between Ontario and Missouri and this school and Ontario universities, Ontario schools. So that we are working on that. But in the private sector, they already do that. It depends on the company. And if you're working for them and you want to work in Ontario for a month or whatever, a summer internship, I mean, they can arrange for that. And where I can help on that is on the immigration side, working with the Canadian consulate in Chicago, which covers this territory, and they can help you get that student visa. But the corporation would really be driving that too. They've got immigration lawyers on both sides of the border. Oh, that I don't know. But that's my email. Email me anytime for anything and I can follow up on that stuff for you.
If any of our audience decides to visit Ontario after hearing you speak, they would obviously go to Toronto, maybe Niagara Falls. What do you recommend that Americans see and do in Ontario?
I would be evaporated if I told you to just go to Toronto. Ontario's got a lot going on and especially just across the border from Windsor, which is across the river from Detroit, going all the way to Eastern Ontario, the Quebec-Ontario border. there's a lot to do, a lot happening. Then when you go further north, there's a lot going on too. It depends on the time of year too. But every community has something fun happening. And I mean, obviously Toronto has a lot, and the greater Toronto area has a lot. There's more to Toronto than the CN Tower and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So you get a hotel room and you just walk around and you act like a tourist. But hopefully when you're there and if you want, you try and do some meetings with at different schools, depending on what your interests are, what your goal is, what the agenda is. If you're going for pleasure, there's a lot to do. But, there's also a lot going on in terms of academics and business. So it's just a matter of what you're looking to do or, what your agenda is. So.
Well, any final thoughts before we adjourn? Do we have a question?
So you said that Ontario and Missouri, they had one of the biggest trades. What were some of the goods that were coming from Canada into the United States?
Well, so as I said earlier, it's 6.6 billion two-way trade. 4.5 billion of that in US dollars is Missouri selling to Ontario. So Missouri does a lot of things very well. Food, dog food, pet food, which is different from food. And beer. So that's just two things. But Missouri's doing very well in terms of life sciences and med tech. And Ontario is about to make a big pivot to life sciences. We did really well in the electric vehicle and battery sector. Ontario does a lot of things very well too. So the traditional stuff like manufacturing of food and a lot of the if you go into an American supermarket and you look at their private label stuff and you look on where it's made, it's usually from Ontario, like crackers, cereal, so a lot of fresh vegetables. We've got a great greenhouse operation. So Missouri sells, it's just heavy manufacturing, and stuff like that. And I can get you the details on that if you'd like, but you can also email me. That's my email there. And I can follow up with more specific questions on that for you.
And by coming to Missouri, you have helped our economy. You've made several purchases in the
Yes.
bookstore.
Yeah.
You bought coffee.
Yeah.
So we need you to come back more often.
And well, actually, I will be. Now that we know how to get here, we'll do a road trip. The plan was always to do a road trip to Missouri. We always have to fly in. So I've been to St. Louis 3 times and I've had to fly in. Once I drove, but the pandemic got in the way of the very ambitious agenda we had. And all I can tell you, you're going to see a lot more of me in 2025. That may be good or bad. I don't know. But we have a plan when the new governor's in place to do an Ontario-Missouri economic MOU. It's a memorandum of understanding. It's an aspirational document, not legally binding, but it lays the foundation, establishes a foundation for sub-agreements on agriculture, on med tech and life sciences, economic development, stuff like that. But what I really care about, not just because I'm here, but because I believe passionately in building these partnerships between Ontario universities and, in this case, Missouri universities. And it's all about having an enthusiastic partner. So, I'm very close to the president of the school now. We're best buddies. So he, I think there's huge potential for that. The Premier of Ontario says frequently, and language far more colorful than I'm going to share now, things get done when people know each other. And the last few days, I've been able to establish those relationships with my new best friend, the president of the school, and other students and you. So, and I want to thank you for the invitation to be here.
Well, I thought I was your new best friend. I didn't know you
No,
had
he's
another
more
one.
important.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry. There's also a bunch of Ontario chocolate here that I'm not taking back to Chicago. So please help yourselves to it. But I'm just excited for the opportunity to have been here. I was able to participate in everything, and it was great. You know, that movie yesterday, or the presentation about the Great Maple Heist. Ontario makes the best maple syrup. I didn't want to say that and hurt Quebec's feelings yesterday. But Ontario is the best province. We make the best everything in Canada. There's nobody from Quebec to rebut, so I'm happy to keep chirping about that. So
And it's okay if they email you day or night?
anytime, what bothers me is the premier calls me and he goes, buddy, how many jobs have you created? And then, what are you doing? That's not good enough. And by the end of it, I'm crying in the corner of my office and Carson has to come in and tell me it's okay. Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford, cares passionately about the Ontario-US engagement. He knows that I'm here and he was thrilled I was coming here. This is a kind of cutting edge engagement, political and economic engagement that I'm supposed to do. And it's a whole vision he had in creating an office in Chicago, an Ontario office in Chicago, and appointing me as Ontario's first agent general. So it is, I think I see huge potential and huge opportunity. So.
And you'll be signing autographs afterwards?
No, I think that would be a bit much, I thought about it, but anyhow.
Well, let's give Earl Provo a round of applause for coming to Missouri Southern. And
Thank
feel
you.
free to stick around and chat with him afterwards. Thank you.